Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to my channel. I'm not sure if you noticed recently, but it's spring outside. That's right, it's so cold, the air doesn't just hurt my face. It also calls me names, berates me, outright attacks me.
Okay, I love you. I love you too.
Get her out of here.
Okay.
Actually, I can slap the shit out of you because
Do it! Slap me, bitch!
And for reasons beyond my control and beyond human understanding, I still need to go outside every once in a while, when I could be huddled up inside with a blanket enjoying the warmth. I mean, mostly this is because it's hard to go running inside. It's a lot easier to run outside. So, I need another hat. A couple weeks ago, I ordered a knitting loom to see if this would make my life any easier. You know, I thought it might be faster to knit with a loom rather than doing it with 2 needles. So I got this one here. Now this is one of those looms that's adjustable. So it came with a bunch of different pieces and you can kind of choose how big of a loom you actually want to make. So I snapped these pieces here together. But it also comes with a bunch of different pieces here that you can make the loom bigger, or you can take one apart and make them smaller. And with this, you can make a loom that suits the size of the project you're actually trying to work on, rather than having like a really big loom for knitting a hat or one that's too small, which I thought was pretty neat. So if you haven't watched my previous hat making video, I suggest you watch it here, because I'll be following the same pattern in this video as I did in the previous one, except instead of using 2 needles, I will be using this guy here, and this thing, which is like a hook to actually do the thing. So for this hat, like the ones I made before, I'm going to be using one ball of yarn. So I'll be using Bernat Sakti Chunky, and I got this really awesome gray color, which I thought would look good in a hat. And this is a size 6 super bulky acrylic yarn. So like I said, if you watched my previous video, the hat pattern that I'm following is pretty simple. Basically, you start with 30 cast-on stitches and you knit about 60 rows with a simple garter stitch. Now, I've never done this before, but I would imagine that knitting with 2 needles, doing a simple garter stitch would be roughly the same as knitting with a loom. Now, I've never done this before. This is my first time knitting with this, but we're gonna see if this actually makes it faster, because I would love to not spend hours and hours and hours making hats. So this loom is sized for chunky yarn. So the space in between the pegs, like this here, that's about 5/8 of an inch. And I feel like that's gonna be appropriate for a size 6 bulky yarn. So if you have a loom at home, use something like this with similar spacing. Let's get into it.
Okay, so to start, I have my ball of yarn here and I'm going to remove the sleeve. I'm not actually going to use the long cast on tail method. This peg right here with the red yarn is going to be my last peg, and I have a mark just to know where to stop. This loom has 32 pegs and I'm just going to be using 31 just because. So I'm going to tie the yarn on the peg next to it because this is going to be our anchor peg. Then we're going to wrap the pegs all the way around for 31 stitches. So you're going to make this wrapping motion all the way around each peg until you get to the last one, which has the red yarn loop on it. And make sure you don't continue onto the anchor peg because that does not count as one of our pegs. To continue casting on, we need to use the pick tool. Take the working yarn, wrap it around again, and flip the first loop over the top of the one you just made. And you'll have to move that first row of loops down the pegs a bit so you have room to make another loop on top. This is called the U-wrap method, I believe. And you're just going to repeat this for every peg until you get back to the first one. But be careful to not also do this to the anchor peg. That anchor peg is coming off soon. And now that you've done all that work, you're done with your cast on. So in order to do a knit row, you need to go back and wrap all the pegs again. But the yarn is facing the wrong direction, so you need to do a figure 8 around peg 1 and then continue wrapping all the pegs through the last one. This method of wrapping all the pegs at once is called the E-wrap. And you're going to do the same thing as we did when we were casting on. Lift the first loop over the second loop with the hook tool. So to knit the garter stitch on a loom is actually a 2-row pattern rather than the typical 1-row repeat. The first row is going to be knit stitches, and the second row is going to be purl stitches. And you just repeat rows 1 and 2 until you get at least 60. And I've read online that you might want to do a few pegs at the beginning and at the end first, and then do the middle pegs so that you have consistent tension, but I have no idea if that's actually true or not. And remember that your cast on does not count as your first row, so you still have 60 rows left. And once you've done that for all pegs, that counts as your first row. Now you can remove the knot around the anchor peg because everything is held together by your first row. Now on to row 2. For row 2, we're going to skip the last peg. You'll bring that yarn down in front and underneath that first loop. Slip your hook tool underneath that first loop and grab the working yarn to make another loop. And you're going to slip that first loop off the peg and drop it, and place that new loop on the peg and pull the working yarn to tighten it. And you just need to repeat this for the entire row until you get to peg 1, which you will not purl. Instead, you're going to wrap the yarn in a figure 8 again, and then continue on to the third row, which is the knit stitch again. The only pegs you ever skip in this pattern are the first and last ones when you are purling only. Alright, so here you can see that I have about 60 rows. I think I actually did 64 for this hat. To cast off, we're going to start with a modified cast off. To do this, we wrap the first 2 pegs and lift those 2 first stitches off. Then you lift that loop on peg 2 and place it over peg 1. And lift that peg 1 loop over the one on top. Move that loop over to peg 2 and repeat the process around the loom. To continue, you're only going to wrap 1 peg at a time. Each time it's the quote-unquote second peg. When you get to the last loop, it's the same process. All you need to do is cut off the tail and make sure they have about 2 feet of yarn so you can sew the hat together. You just lift the last loop off the peg and slide the working yarn through to finish that knot. You're going to fold the piece like this and take the working yarn and stick it through the needle and start sewing that seam together. You only want to grab the very edge of each side, and you want to sew 1 stitch for about every row, so about 30 times. So when you get to the top, you're going to look at these high ridges here, and you're going to sew around the rim, grabbing the top stitch of every other high row. And when you get back to the seam, you're going to pull that working yarn to tighten the loop. Then you'll sew a knot near the seam that has the working yarn to hold that tension. And once you've done that, you're pretty much done. Now you can cut your tail short and weave in the ends of the hat and you're complete.
Alright, and here's the finished product. I like the way it looks. I mean, it looks like all the other hats that I made so far, but this is a great color, and it's gonna be really warm and it's really comfortable, and this garter stitch really gives it a good amount of stretch so that it sticks to your head without being too loose. Now, as for knitting this whole thing with this guy here, I am not a big fan. Garbage. Trash. I mean, like, the whole process wasn't awful, but it did take me about twice the amount of time to knit this hat with a loom than it did with knitting needles. Normally I can knit a beanie in like 2 hours or so when I'm using needles, but with this guy, this took me like 5 hours to do. I don't know why. I mean, I guess it's because I'm new to this and I'm, doing it for the first time, but still, I feel like the whole point of this is to make it faster to knit certain things. And I guess for certain patterns, it might be able to be a little bit faster. If you're doing a stockinette stitch in which you're just doing knit stitches on this all the way around, that might be a little bit faster than doing it with needles, but otherwise, I don't think this is any faster. Now let's go see if this hat is actually warm. I think a loom might actually be for people who aren't able to hold knitting needles properly. Maybe they have like some arthritis or something, but I think that's the last time I'm gonna be using this unless it's to knit a scarf, which I might actually do. So hopefully you guys found this useful. This was an experiment. I didn't know what I was expecting out of this, but I have another hat out of it, so it's a win-win situation, right? But anyways, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe down below for more videos. Bye!